I think one can really argue that an institution, a national institution, an institution that is intended to narrate the nation, isn't necessarily in the business of preservation. I think that a home is absolutely only in the business of preservation. One is only caring for one's legacy, right? Like one's own children, one's own family tree, one's ancestors. That's all a home is, in a way, you could say. But a nation is narrating itself, and so in some ways, a nation is I wouldn't go as far as saying it's actively destroying the past, but it is always narrating and re-narrating itself. So on some fundamental level, it is willing to leave behind narrations that it no longer wants to be associated with.
What is the archive's response to the national state of erasure or national narrative of erasure? This is for more for deliberation. How does Patni archive feel? Were they not included in the national narrative? They prefer that they have the say in how the narrative is being built now. So it's okay if the national narrative didn't include them, but still there can be relationships with the national institution.
It is his personal history, and that movement actually has a lot of contention around it, and so and a lot of interpretation. So it's like I think the actual images are, it's not that I think they were like almost purposefully in many ways lost. And I think he would have been okay with that too, because I think there's like a sense of pride when he talks about it. So I think like what might have been lost is just the act of being there, like the community feelings, like I think what happens is it's like it gets open to historical interpretation without and I think what a photograph does that's so interesting is like you get the feeling of the faces of the people. And so like over here, like this kind of thing, so this was a boy. And so then this is totally my interpretation: found woman in public space seeking answers. So, because then I started reading a little bit about just the women coming out as well. So these women could be witnesses, but I kind of am interpreting them as that they were seeking answers, like they were consciously there. And I think it could be true actually, because just to think about why they would come, because and I think there's so much history behind this that it's like it's actually, and it seems like very contentious, like in terms of the interpretation because of local politics and leadership. So it's like I don't even know if this is where it's like I am interpreting, because I don't even know, I didn't get to ask him enough questions and ask the people around him like who he is in the movement really. So I think I'm interested in the idea of like actually a community as well, like a community that wants, because I think like there is truth to the fact that the community was disenfranchised, and then that's why this all happened.
But with because the library was on ground floor, and actually speaking, the flooding had reached up to the first floor. So what had happened was all the books were gone, that entire treasure was gone, and whatever little I got from some random person in a garden, in a park near my home, that I thought, well, she just said she wanted to get rid of some books, in the sense that she wanted to give it to someone who would be using them. And I was talking about my struggle with the script, and me not having enough material to read and things like that. And she said, well, you can have my father's books. And that's how the books kept coming, and I also started collecting them. Books, you will find that in the olden times how there were magazines, and those magazines used to have ads also, like another book would be advertised, or a local business would be advertised. So some of these books had an appeal that please buy Sindhi books, make every house a library, make every house a Sindhi library. And maybe that is what excited this, tuition teacher to collect all the books. He understood that, of course, he's teaching, math for, his bread and butter, but keeping the language and by supporting its writers, by supporting its publishers was equally important.
The old timber that is actually used in the tile factories, that is actually not thrown away. Many of the interior designers in that area are reusing it for the house interiors in that place, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something that is being thrown away, but it is whenever a factory comes out and says that we are selling out things, so this timber and wood is actually used for this purpose.
That's another form of archiving, isn't
Yes,
it?
that's another form of archiving, because I know that my cousins who are now there, they really value all these things, and they're actually going out and collecting these and putting it up in their houses.
Right. The other thought that I had, just as we were talking about what goes into the archive, and how things are cataloged. In any archive, there's this whole bunch of things. There's this whole lot of things that are not cataloged, that are just kept, that don't get any identity, even though being in the archive.
Yeah.
And who decide, so even when the person who's cataloging them and taking a call on what should be cataloged, even if it is in an archive, it goes into an archive, but who takes the decision of what gets cataloged and what doesn't get cataloged? Because that is like giving an identity, giving a value, a function value to these objects. So I was thinking along the lines that, if these are objects that one may, if they're lying around in our houses, one may just overlook them. What if these objects go into the Kacheri as uncatalogued objects that are part of the archive but not catalogued? By not being catalogued, they don't have an identity.
It's the quote from System of Collecting by Jean Bourdieu. He basically questions, in response to all the questions that you have put, um, whether objects can ever institute themselves as a viable language, and can they ever be fashioned into a discourse oriented otherwise than to toward oneself. And this this sort of really, I think, connects with what we are trying to do with um, uh, personal histories, that it's discourse oriented. An object can have all these uh, various meanings and narratives, and it it comes like in an institutional space. It somehow is, the information given about an object and how we are supposed to perceive it is more on evidential facts, but there are many underlying histories and personal biographies that an object can hold. With the research that I did was on a very ordinary object, which was the grandmother's sari, and meeting my grandmother who I've never met before, and is through an object. And also, when you said that, does the body become home to these stories? We learn to care and connect through our bodies. That's where I really connected with it, because apart from actually talking to my mother or people who knew my grandmother about the object, I was actually interacting with the sari myself, like how my body felt, and how I was able to care for it while wrapping it around my body or play with it, how I was storing it. And that somehow transitioned into a reflective journal where I was starting to personify the object itself.
That does make very, very, very much sense. And that's exactly how she kept it. Like, that box was of her pictures with my grandfather, and I remember
I
this
can
picture.
read it. Yeah, I can imagine. Those were, and then they got boxed also.
Absolutely.
Because he passed away, they got boxed away. That's also an
Absolutely.
act in itself.
But the interesting thing is that every so now and ever so often she would pull. I don't know why she would do that, and we would, my dad would scold her very much for doing that. But she would pull out my grandfather's glasses and she would wear them and move around the house.
You
And
miss him.
yeah, and but like it was actually very detrimental for her
Her
own
eyes.
eyesight. But she's like, no, I'm going to read my newspaper with this today, with these glasses today. I'm like, no, you can't. You shouldn't do that. You, your eyes are very weak. She's like, no, I'm gonna do that.
What is the word that you used?
The agency of the dead in archiving.
Hmm. See, it's very interesting. See, I find this very interesting, and that's a very like so I've been thinking through this the most. The fact that these people are dead. Okay, this is
Yeah.
where I coming. I feel like whatever I do, I have to give it a lot of respect, and whatever I do, I have to be very very careful. Not because I don't want it to be public, but it's just out of respect that it has been kept so well and probably private. So when I am putting it out there, I feel like this is exactly what I want to put it out there, is that these are people who are probably people who didn't want to be known, and keep it that way, but at the same time that they were like, these are things that exist. This is an object of a woman, gorgeous looking from a film continuity. Still it exists,
Mhm.
and I have it. But yes, I don't know some of them and I know some of them, but there is a story which all of these women have, that either I'm interested to know, and that is what got me to start the archive in the first place.
What? So we started first with this thought that a day or a glimpse into the life of a divan
Hmm.
first, but then it turned around to be like bits and pieces of the archive, more like, rather than just his life, because again the archive revolves around intergenerational thing rather than just one person. And so when we were just discussing about what kind of objects we want to put through it, uh, we both thought in like maybe a different way, but that, okay, because it's intergenerational and it also talks about a lot about what was happening politically or economically in during those decades. So like we have this freedom to put it from a family perspective as well as a political perspective. So like if we put just one narrative, then half of it will be lost. So like just putting little bits and pieces from and interconnecting them in a blurred way would be more interesting, like, and leave it up to people to interpret it like what they are taking away from our archives rather than giving
Yeah.
them a proper outlined structure.
So lately, I've been playing memory games a lot with my grandmother, actually. And this one is of, I don't know if you've seen this game before, but I got it off Okai. And the thing is, it's called Go in Housing. I mean, Go in Windows.
Yes, I've seen it.
And it just has windows. That's it.
Hmm.
You need to match them. I was wondering if I could play around with this a little bit, in the
Okay.
sense where there are barely any houses on my street which have the original form, like even from the facade. And I was thinking if I could even find one house that has that original look of it, and then taking a series of photos of how it's changed. Um,
Hmm.
and because I feel like, so I'm already the second generation living in this house. But in the future, there won't be anybody who will know how these houses have been looked or how they were first constructed. Maybe a couple of months ago, the person who works for Thomas, Shakil, he passed away, and he is someone who has worked in every house in this colony. He's been everybody's electrician, plumber, etc. And he used to work with Thomas, and after that, he himself became a contractor. So it's not a contractor, but he was the one who actually did the groundwork. So on one hand, there's this architect who's done this colony, then there's the contractor, and then there's a person who's actually doing the real work of it, where once the house is done, everybody contacts him.
Right.
And now he's not there. Like ideally, I would have done this recce with him, you know. where he would even tell me the tiniest things that, oh, we had changed the piping for this place, which I wouldn't have understand, but he would remember a house because of that. Um, Whereas I was thinking maybe I could even like I don't know whether I want to make it more layered um, or not. But now his sons have no choice and they've taken over this job. And I wonder, how many houses do they remember that their father?
So one of the idea I have in my mind is basically whatever we create, the new archives I'm talking about, right? Whether it holds an original material, whether it holds a digital collection, whether it holds people's history or oral history or any cultural related material or any kind of stories that is attached with humans, for example, right? Human life. Somehow it has to be institutionalized. So I really want to kind of think about an idea or think in a concept how we can work together to create an institution so that these materials, what we have collected as a personal correction, could live for another 100 years. What is important is the data we have collected over the period of time. If it is not shared with people, it doesn't mean anything. It has to be shared with people, right? So that it can be utilized by the next generation. And that is also a way to activate these archives as well, right?
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, to think about it, to have a conversation with them, because for some weird reason they've always drawn this association between him and me, and also this huge regret that they've had that हमने उनकी सारी किताबें दे दी, and what they did with the books is horrendous. Like they didn't even give it to some library, whatever, like that. There's so much regret in there. I think they just gave all his, like, all the books, the entire library to, I don't know, some random person, or what they did with the books. No one has accountability for it, except that there's huge amount of regret around it. So I think that also plays a very important part, the loss, the feeling of loss of, yeah, it's almost like something I could have owned from him, and yet I don't have. So there's a huge chunk of absence. It's almost like painful, to, I don't know how to put it, and how that in larger picture, how loss of belongings equates to loss of that person. Yeah, it's equivalent. So even like a book being lost is equivalent to not having him.
The objects we were thinking, there are these grid pads that are there in the studio, which
It's a sketch pad, which is a square pad essentially. It's a
yeah,
spiral bound sketch pad. I may have one
and
lying around.
Pradeep used to use them, and also they were kind of like things which we used to just
Looks like that, literally. Literally, it's a square pad like this.
and it was also kind of like everybody who came into the office, used it. I mean, like if you were a client, you used it during a meeting to take your notes. It was almost like some sort of a token of membership of the community, not just something that we used in the studio. It was sort of like this. So we were thinking of sort of bringing some of those, and then
And I think in these pads was where Pradeep mostly he started his day by scribbling into that pad and saying,
the
"Okay,
list of
this is
things he
what
had
I'm
to
going
do.
to do." His things to do list, and when somebody was there, of course, in meetings he would write his notes in that. While on the phone, he would scribble into it and make some, squiggles and things like that, and maybe some ideas generated out of that as well. So those were like, in fact, we have a stack of those with us, which belongs to him, which his son has got now. But they were really like it was a big part of him as a person and the whole studio as well.
photos have a very interesting function. And just like any, I mean, I think that's just such a larger conversation in the US. Like should we as photographers be at protests? What happens when you take pictures of people? So like there's a huge conversation around surveillance and people's faces, like the showing the activist faces and things like that.
Prohibition and restrictions are something there to kind of protect the materials that we have. It protects the ownership of the document, the person who actually produced these documents, and that is a legal boundary, something that we all need to accept it, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
It challenges the collective memory of
Exactly.
people, in fact, yeah,
Yeah.
of our age, but somehow people who are growing up without experiencing this festival, they would be left without any collective memory, you know.
And what is
So yeah,
interesting is your project has the possibility of you saying towards the end, if you would like to,
yeah,
is
yeah.
asking this question about how do I archive things which are prohibited? So in your archive, the whole idea of prohibition gets highlighted so strongly. How do
Yeah,
you
exactly.
archive something which is prohibited but should be remembered because it's important, as you said, for collective memory for generations to come?
Absolutely. And I also feel like the whole world of archiving is something that is introduced to people. I don't think it comes very naturally to people who have owned images to look at it as something of value. I think it comes from a very simplistic place, in at least case of me, where in spite of being in the world of photography, I did not think these objects as of something that would be of such value, or the
Exactly.
information,
Yeah.
and also to separate it between my personal life and to make it public, which was also something I feel like it's not for me to say, because it's not about me, it's about people who are not there anymore and their lives. And a lot of it is like hearsay and like oral histories only of the people who are alive about the people who are dead, and how much of that information you want to put out there. I think it's more of something I personally didn't know how to go about it. Now, slowly working with my mom, with her parents, I feel like I'm able to at least speak up about what their story is, because she has a authenticity to the narration and like the whole experience that she's had. However, having said that, I have to be careful that she's always been a private person. My grandparents have always been a private person. So why make it public in the first place? It's just something, stays personal.
Yeah, all of it also makes me wonder. Yeah, I think some of what I hear you, I hear you moving between these highly individual notions of what is to be saved and something more communal. And I suppose what you will have to thread through is the end point. Like, even if you're looking at something highly individual, what would be the end point of an archive? What is the end point of saving something? Because usually the archivist is someone other than the person who is the subject of the archival materials. And I think that there's something very different when the subject is the archivist, because the agendas are different. Whether that's an individual or whether that's a nation, the agendas are different. Like, the archivist is a very different. And then the other question is, like, what's the purpose of archiving? Because, in an official archive, like, the archivist doesn't technically is neutral, right? Like, technically the archivist is preserving things so that historians can come in, and the historians are the ones with the agenda. But this is a really, like, when you are making intentional archives, the archivist's agenda, I think, would be an important thing to distinguish.
Yeah, I was thinking that since social media is already an archive, there's that you just go and see years of things. There's that thing, right? The question comes that why are you archiving it in print? It's already up there, and I don't know. I think like I'm one artist once had said that when the internet first came on, there was this fear that the internet might disappear any day. You know, so I know that fear is not there anymore. But I don't know. I was thinking that the logic to printing and archiving something versus something that's already there on social media that some people think that might go on forever. That's going to live forever. So I was just thinking in terms of how can I present the logicality of why are you archiving this, because now that you have mentioned about how the exhibition is sort of going to be presented and the logic behind it, so I'm thinking of it from that perspective too.
The chop which you have to, the imprint you have to put is in the minds of people. How long can you keep making something which is physical? So the stories like you collect are the stories which come and stay in the mind. So, like for me, the idea of my grandmother, whom I've never seen, and even I don't remember my grandfather very clearly. I was just 10 when he passed away, 10 or 8. So it was long back. But I'm fascinated. What life would she would have led, and she went and studied, and then I found out the school. I found out the British lady who was part of the Theosophical Society, as well as her husband was some kind of an administrator, but she set up the school. No, I never bargained for being in this country or having these parents or something. This is not by chance that you're here. But it's so important is the people you make friendship with, the people you meet, because that's your choice. So, who are my choices and what I've got as a legacy? And do I have to be totally beholden to the legacy at all? Or beholden to my choices? And then my choices can also evolve, change.
Like, I think what I really wanted, like what I took back when I, what I take back is, so, like this, like there are certain aspects of a life which, become like continuous, like, or a routine. So in a way, like from her birth till her death, like this kind of remained in a routine, like all of us have like that one routine or something like that. And I don't know, like for me, that was the part, like her act of, like maintaining that routine made me connect to her so much. Like, that became a part of my life too. Like her routine became a part of my life. So, like, I don't know.
So I'm thinking, how are you archiving? Ever since I picked up this, in fact, starting of the fellowship itself, because I think you don't believe when your proposal gets accepted. Till that point, you have not put in the thought, and then suddenly, like, oh, I'm going to archive these, exhibit these personal histories. What is it so different about them? And then it would keep me against making it a museum of sorts. What would be the difference between, or not different, but how do we position archiving in response to displaying versus utilizing? So while we know we are not displaying
Right.
in the papers also, we know there is no utilization also, and hence its archiving is clear.
Hmm.
When do we know that sari is archived?
Hmm.
That's the simplest way to put my question. When do we know it's not on display? Because I am only questioning my own thought, right? When I said we are archiving and hence we're putting it inside a box. So does a box become the identity of an archive and hence it's an archive? Or what else needs to happen, which tells us that the sari is archived? You might say utilization is a part of archiving
Yes.
and displaying is a part of archiving, is where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So how did you display or how did you utilize / wear? And hence it added to the process of archiving instead of being just another day of sari wear.
Right.
So
I
you have
mean,
already worn them. You've already done
yes.
that. So if you were to reflect on this question, what was that act of wearing which aligns with the idea of archiving, which sets it apart? And then I think coming back to the practical aspect, if you think like this, and if this is something that connects for you also, then I can imagine that the box has definitely both the part of the story of Dadi, but story of Niyati.